programs that I'm going to talk about, the Deschutes River reintroduction, I'm going to, if I can get time to do that, but I'm going to focus on the genetic monitoring of the clay loam reintroduction program. I have more data on that, it's a little bit further along, some rather interesting results, but I hope to be able to have time to contrast that with what's going on in the Deschutes River Basin. Because I want to do those two things, I want to thank the organizers for giving me the only 40-minute time slot today. So, okay, moving right along. Just to sort of reiterate and clarify, make sure everybody's on the same page. Where the little fish is, there is Priest Rapids Dam. The Yakima Nation is gathering their outplant fish at Priest Rapids. It's a mix of the two extant Upper Columbia stocks in Lake Wenatchee and the Soyuz Lake. And so it's obviously a mix of those two fish, those two stocks, and then they're trucked up to the lake there. Just want to point out also Bonneville Dam, the location of Bonneville Dam, which is the first barrier in the Columbia River down there in the lower left. So this is really the only, statistical slide, genetics slide that I have for you, and it's rather easy to look at, I think. What I want to show you here is that this is a PCA plot showing the individual fish that we evaluated for genetic stock ID. And you can see that if you're a Wenatchee fish, coded blue here, you cluster on one side of this plot, and if you're a Soyuz fish, you're green and you cluster on the other side of the plot. What I'm really trying to depict here is that, genetically speaking, these could be two entirely different animals because we can differentiate them almost diagnostically. So, for example, the Wenatchee reference population we looked at, they self-assigned back to the Wenatchee population 100% of the time with an average likelihood of 99.9%, and a similar result for the Soyuz. So, to start off, the nice thing here is that we can tell what is an Soyuz origin fish and what is a Wenatchee origin fish just based on the genetic ID of those fish, okay? So these are some pie charts showing what is actually being outplanted, what's being taken at Priest Rapids Dam, and what's being outplanted into Clay Loam Lake. See on the larger pie chart in the middle, that's the 5-year average. So on average, we're taking about 76% of Soyuz fish in that Priest Rapids sample that's going to the outplant. That mirrors very well what the Columbia River returns are at Bonneville. So it's consistent with portions at Bonneville where it's about 78% of Soyuz. So we're taking fish in proportion to what their abundances are coming up the river, coming up the Columbia River. Then there's just 5-year differences there. So you can see some annual variation in the take. In 2013, there was only actually about 7% of those were Wenatchee fish, and then as many as 40% in 2015, but on average, it's about 76%. So I'm going to just go right from what's being outplanted to what we're seeing in carcass surveys here. We surveyed 3 reaches of the headwater river. Reach 1 is the furthest upstream. Intermediate reach is reach 2, and then reach 3 includes some nearshore habitat, and then the braided section of the river as it enters into the plain. And you can see actually reach 3 what it sort of looks like, the bottom part of it on the left there. So just keep those 3 in mind, and then of course there's the outplant site where the fish are being trucked up and dumped into the lake there. So what I want to show you here is that spatially, if we look at the furthest upstream section in reach 1 there on the left, overall our carcass recoveries there are dominated by Wenatchee fish. 12% of our total carcass recoveries have been in that, have been Wenatchee fish in reach 1, compared to 26% of total carcass recoveries of Wenatchee fish in reach 2, and then 36 in the lower reach, reach 3. By comparison, you can see in the upper reach of the river, 4% of the total carcass recoveries are Soyuz fish, and then in the middle, 3%, and 19 in the lower section of the river. Temporally, on the right here, you can see starting in late September, early October, you get the Wenatchee fish recoveries happening right away with a peak there sometime I think in early October. As you move towards October 22nd, then you really start to see a pulse of Soyuz fish. Now, what I neglected to tell you, and I was hoping I was going to remember to tell you, is that the two donor stocks have some pretty profound differences. One in run timing, spawn timing, the habitat of the natal stocks. Wenatchee Lake is much higher in elevation, cold, glacial bed. Those fish tend to spawn earlier than the Soyuz fish. Soyuz fish have sort of a thermal delay in the Columbia River. It's a much warmer environment where they spawn. And so that as these fish are being outplanted, and we're hoping that this reintroduction is going to take and these fish are going to develop their own wild population, really one of the biggest interests is one of these stocks going to do better than the other? Will they hybridize? Will they maintain their discreteness? These kinds of things. And so I want to show you that, going back to this plot, that there's a temporal distinction in when these fish are spawning. This initial pulse dominated by Wenatchee fish, and then there's a second spawning pulse that's dominated by these Soyuz fish. But you can also see on the left that in space there's also some distinctions, where in reach 2 and reach 1, the two upper reaches, 7% of those are Soyuz fish, compared to 38% Wenatchee fish. And then you see the largest contingent of the Soyuz fish in the lower section of the river there. Okay? So there's a bit of a, getting kind of ahead of myself here, but did want to show you that, remember that average carcass recovery then is going to be about 74% Wenatchee fish. So in the 3 or 4 years that we've done this, 74% of the carcasses we recovered have been Wenatchee fish, but I told you earlier than that 76% of the fish being outplanted are Soyuz fish, right? We're not really recovering a lot of those when we do these surveys in these 3 reaches. But as Brian alluded to, when they're doing these Mackinac surveys in this near shore area, which is south of the release site by quite a distance and opposite the direction of the spawning habitat in the stream, they're getting this bycatch of sockeye. And lo and behold, 100% of those are Soyuz origin fish. So it turns out that these Soyuz fish are utilizing the lake habitat to a much larger degree for spawning than the Wenatchee fish. In fact, as far as we know, perhaps Wenatchee fish aren't using the shore area at all for spawning. And I have some corroborating evidence that this is happening. We have this temporal spawning distinction and a spatial spawning distinction that equals assortative mating. And in fact, I can tell you that we're not seeing any hybrids coming out of the system here. We look at all the smolts out migrating, we see no hybrids. When we look at the adult fish coming back, we see no hybrids. Well, Wenatchee fish remains a Wenatchee fish, and then the Soyuz fish remains a Soyuz fish. So here's what the quail and owl migrants look like. These are the smolts. Over the period 2013 to 2015, about 49% Wenatchee, about 46% of Soyuz. So productivity is relatively equal as far as smolt out migrations from these two stocks that are being outplanted. There's some annual variation. You can see, obviously, 2013 is about 54% Wenatchee, and then that drops down to about 26% in 2014, and then back up to about 58% in 2015. So kind of interesting that the annual variation that's going on in the proportions of these out migrants. It looks like, based on the relatively small sample that we have, 1,258 fish here, but it looks like there's really no distinction in the out-migration time of these fish. If you look at the histogram on the right here, with ordinal day on the x-axis, they're pretty much coming out at the same time, so there's no distinction there. It doesn't look like we're sampling one and not the other, so it just looks like there's actually a lot of variation from year to year in the proportions. Okay, so what about the smolt size of the out-migrants, though? Again, very large variation from year to year. If you look at the top there in 2013, you see some rather large fish, and the average size of fish in 2014 looks like it's decreased dramatically, and then back up again in 2015. I will point out, though, at least in the first 2 years, that you can see the blue there representing the Wenatchee. Those smolts are considerably larger than the Sockeye fish coming out. And yet, if you look at that 100 millimeter line that's going up there, in both of those natal stocks, the average fork length of an out-migrating smolt is somewhere between 87 and 93 millimeters. And about 93 to 95% of the out-migrants from both of those natal stocks are 1-year-olds. Okay? So when I look at this, it sure looks to me like most of these fish are coming out as 2-year-olds. I can't confirm that because I don't have ages on these, but they sure are large. And I've talked to biologists from both of the Wenatchee and the Sockeye, and I sent them some of these plots, and they said, wow, those are really big smolts. So really interesting that in the 2 natal areas, those fish are coming out almost exclusively as 1-year-olds, and these look like they're dominated very highly by 2-year-olds. So here's what the wild returns look like then. These are fish that these are progeny of outplants. So these are fish that would have been out of the gravel, reared up in the lake, moved out to the ocean, and come back as wild fish from the Cleveland program. Again, some more of that interannual variation. In 2012, this would only include 3-year-olds because the program started in 2009. So that was a small sample size, and you can see that with the exception of 2 fish in 2012, they were all the Sockeye origin fish. This will not be surprising when I show you the next slide, but then if you go to 2013, you see it's about 65% of Sockeyes, 46% of Sockeyes, 60% of Sockeyes. So the returns are generally dominated by Sockeyes, but not to a huge degree. It's anywhere from 35 to 54% Wenatchee origin fish returning. Again, the return date, you can see that there's really no difference in the average return time of those fish back to Rosie Dam in the middle Yakima River. So here's what the size distribution of those returns looks like. Looks to me like the Wenatchee origin are dominated by 1 age class of fish. In fact, it looks like there's only 1 age class of fish there. Whereas with the Sockeyes, it looks like there's 2. I don't have ages on these fish, this is the size distribution. But if I compare that to what's coming up the Columbia River, so these are fish that were aged at Bonneville Dam. And so I have 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds in the Wenatchee stock to compare to. Confirms to me that it looks like there's really no 5-year-old Wenatchee coming back to Clay Ellen Lake, but it makes up about 18% of the Wenatchee population in its natal spawning ground. The Soyuz Lake origin fish that are coming back to Clay Ellen, about 19% of those on average would be 3-year-olds coming up to Columbia. But it sure looks to me like there's a disproportionate number of 3-year-old Soyuz fish coming back to Clay Ellen Lake. It's about 46% there, so you see that bimodal distribution. It looks like it's about equal between 2 age classes, whereas coming up to Columbia, it's only about 19% on average. So a disproportionate number of 3-year-olds returning to Clay Ellen. So far, what have we learned? We've learned, luckily and happily, that both stocks are reproductively successful in the lake. It's a novel environment for both of them. It's a little bit like one and a little bit less like the other, that being the Sockeyes. But there's also a pretty dramatic thermal barrier in the lower Yakima where it meets the Columbia. And it's thought that those Sockeyes fish might be better equipped to navigate that thermal barrier in the lower Yakima. So that's the benefit of having those fish. But the Wenatchee origin fish may be more inclined to do better in the Salem environment because it's more similar as far as water temperature, glacial bed, and the local ecology of the lake. But they do have different spawn times and different spawn locations. We're seeing some interesting variability in smolt size and age. It's not reflective of the natal stocks. And the inferred age structure of the returns is curious to me. In other words, see what happens with that and how that's related to these differences, the age of smolts and the size of fish that are coming back. So time will tell. We've expanded our genetic marker panel to 400 SNP markers, and we're going to be able to do parentage on these, and the parentage is going to allow me to get accurate ages on these fish at different life history stages. So that's going to be a good piece of information to have. I'll get through as much of this as I can. I want to share with you a very different reintroduction program that's going on in the Deschutes River. So very briefly, going back to Clayellum, these are sockeye that are being outplanted from natal stocks, from 2 different donor stocks. Here's the Deschutes River. Down here on the left, you see Subtle Lake. This was the nursery lake for sockeye salmon. This is one of only 2 lakes in Oregon where sockeye were indigenous historically. The Deschutes River and the Matala Lake and the Grand Ronde River of eastern Oregon were the only 2 places to find sockeye historically in Oregon. So Subtle Lake, this little tiny nursery lake here, about 1930 they started putting up these little, I don't know, maybe irrigation dams, rather small dams, but with horizontal flashings on them. So there were a couple of different dams. This is some information I got from a NOAA status report. I don't doubt that it's accurate, but there is a little bit of this that's anecdotal, but there were clearly some barriers that were put in there. By 1942, the locals were saying they weren't seeing any more of these bluebacks coming back to Subtle Lake, and so they had been effectively extricated from this nursery lake. Following that, then in 1958, it was Pelton Re-Reg Dam went in, and a couple of years later, in 1964, this big, huge round view complex went in and formed Lake Billy Chinook. And this pretty much did away with any potential sockeye coming back to the river if they were there after those irrigation dams went up at the outlet stream of Subtle Lake. Following that, there was a rather extensive stocking history from multiple sources. Some of it is traceable, some of it is not, as far as what stocks and how many fish, but multiple sources over quite a few years of kokanee stocking. Now there's a rather large spawning population of kokanee in the lake. The fishery on it is popular. This is also one of the only places in the Northwest that I know of where there's a healthy enough bull trout population to have the fishery of bull trout, so that's a big draw. And so the Warm Springs tribe was interested in reintroducing and adding the sockeye into the system. But the issues at hand are a little bit different than they were in Clayellum. And one of the primary things they were interested in is trying to retain any potential local sockeye gene pool that might still exist there. And so they were really hoping to kickstart a reintroduction using the kokanee stock that was in the lake, whatever it may be, whatever its origin may be. They were involved in building a rather large fish trapping station on the lake where smolts are trapped and taken downstream. So you can see here that in 2016 they actually got 536 sockeye back. Doesn't seem like a lot. It isn't a lot, but if you look at the previous years, total fish coming back to the trap was 10, 23, big banner year in 2012 with 98, then back down to 32, 27, and then lo and behold, for whatever reason this last year, they got 536 sockeye back to the Pelton trap below the big dam complexes there. Dominated by 4-year-olds. I can tell you that the size of those 4-year-olds is similar to the size of 4-year-olds sockeye from other populations in the lake that look like sockeye. We've confirmed some of them coming over Bonneville, and so they're behaving and looking as though they are indeed sockeye. However, this is another one of those PCA plots, okay? Blue and green over there are the Osoyoos and Wenatchee stock. Red is the redfish sockeye stock. Yellow is the Lake Billy Chinook, the local kokanee stock. And the other unfilled circles that you can see there are 4 or 5 other kokanee stocks from the Columbia Basin that I've added to this. It sure looks to me like these Lake Billy Chinook fish, these fish coming back from Melton are more kokanee looking than they are sockeye looking. So, genetically, but the population in the lake looks like kokanee. So that's really all I have. I just want to acknowledge the tribes and my coworkers at Cryptic, and sometimes you get lucky to find things like big elk sheds when you're out doing these carcass surveys, so I always like to show that.